Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Marc Polymeropoulos, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Polymeropoulos. All right, I'm getting there, man. I'm getting there. These Greek names, easier than French, but it's a lot of vowels and stuff, you know. It's not quite as hard as like Hawaiian, but I love it, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, so listen, one of the things that's fun about doing this is guys like us, and we've talked on the phone in the past, just for folks that know. Mark used to be in the CIA. He was a collector just like me. We've both have been to a lot of the hard places that the U.S. has been to in the last 20 years. He speaks Arabic. I understand a good bit of Arabic. Every time you wrote Arabic in the book, I'm like, I know what he's saying. So you haven't probably talked to, I'm guessing, another collector who's got, look, I went off the camp every day, right? So not many folks like us out there. How do you relate what it means to do our job?
So, I mean, it's hard to. Relate to the American people. Well, one of the things I wanted to do when I retired is actually talk about the job. You know, a good friend of mine is Mike Morrell, the former acting director of the CIA, and I went to him when I retired, and I said, you know, what do you think of me coming out and actually talking about not only the agency but the operational side, which not a lot of people do. Because I think it's so misunderstood. And ultimately, I feel that the CIA is an indispensable organization. Look, we have our warts. There's been problems in the past, but, you know, espionage is the second oldest profession. So, and it's really, the intelligence community is the nation's first line of defense. So the American people have to understand that it's indispensable. And I wanted to talk about it. And so I try to make it relatable. Sometimes, you know, and of course, you're going up against everything from what is kind of portrayed in Hollywood, which is not really accurate.
Yeah, in Hollywood, James Bond is the newest movie out that kind of does this. You know, he's a collector, he's an analyst, he's operations, he's everything. Right?
Yeah.
That guy is 50 people's careers every. Well,
you know, but Peter, the one thing is that, you know, the intelligence business is you have incredible highs, and there are certainly periods of intense excitement. Most of the job is typing, and it's boring. And so, you know, you have these ups and downs, but people always ask me, you know, what skill set did you have? Were you a good shot? And I'm like, no, carrying a weapon is actually unusual. I actually got to be really good at typing, because if you don't write down in an operational cable what happened, particularly in an agent meeting, it didn't happen. Right. And so a lot of boring time sitting around in safe houses waiting. You wait for agents all the time to show up. And so it's not always what you see in James Bond or Jason Bourne.
I was talking to a friend and we were discussing, we had some time to kill. And I'm like, let me teach you about surveillance and what surveillance looks like. And I'm like, and I explained, he's like, so it sounds like it's fun. And I'm like, it is tragically boring.
The opposite, right?
It is the worst thing, right? And I wanted to ask you, because of what we've done and the really uniqueness of it. I don't know how unique you are in the CIA, but I know, like, on the Army side, what I got to do, there basically is no other career like mine. Like, I'm uniquely experienced and I have so much time. And I think you'll resonate with this. You know, the Army we kind of come in and every time, different place, different job, different organization. I stayed in the same area. And so I would stay 2-3 years in the same spot. And so I got to see not only the other people and get to know them and get to know people that nobody else could know, but also I learned how to work within the Army with different units, because they don't trust me either, right? And so I had a very unique balancing act I had to do between getting the military to trust me and allow me to help them, and then being relevant on the battlefield with the folks that were up to no good, up to good, all the different people that you have to know to do our job well.
Sure. And so, you know, what's really interesting is that 9/11 changed everything, because, you know, kind of when we kind of got together and worked so closely, frankly, with, you know, the Joint Special Operations Command, you know, we had 20 years of this. And so, you know, in the beginning there were hiccups. But then, you know, by the mid 2000s and certainly on, you know, these are people, I went into Baghdad with Naval Special Warfare units, and, you know, then I ended up knowing them for decades. And so you do build an element of trust, which I think is really important, because there was a very kind of unique, relationship, you know, we had with the military, and particularly special operations community. And so, at the end of the day, this job is about relationships. It's about people, and you build trust from being in kind of tough places. And so, we don't always agree with, U.S. military on certain courses of action. But if you know people, if you've been with them in some hard places, it makes it a lot easier.
I got to have Michelle Rigby Assad on the show, and you probably know who Michelle is. And what the thing I got to do was, look, I'm a ground guy, right? I'm an intel guy. And I was able to go, I know a commander who led Marines in combat, in combat. And you guys were in the same area at the same time. So she was focused on Ramadi. Scott Husing, my friend, was there commanding troops, as a company commander. So he was out there in the dirt getting shot at, knocking down doors,
Right.
taking over people's houses. Those two things, they don't talk ever, right? And so I was able to ask them, like, Scott, when you know this intel is coming down, maybe you know it's from the CIA. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But what are your thoughts about who that person is? Because you'll never meet that person. And then the same thing for Michelle. What are you doing? Like, what do you think? Do you ever think about Scott and who that is? And it was remarkable to have them both say there was trust. It's invisible. There's just, I know that they have to do their best job, and they're going to, and I'm not going to let them down. And that's both of them saying that independently.
Well, that's right. And a lot of times you actually would, again, from all the time in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and Somalia and all the places, all the, the garden spots we served, you actually end up in my case, I would know the assault force. So I'm providing intelligence, perhaps, location of a high value target. I know, the guys who are going to kick the door down. So it's a little bit more of an added, incentive for me to get things right. Intelligence is certainly not a perfect science.
Right.
And so sometimes I remember a very senior naval special warfare officer one time looked at me, when we provided some intelligence, he said, "You better be right." And I said, "If that's your thought on the way this goes, this ain't going to work."
Right.
We're going to do the best we can. We're going to give you kind of vetted targeting packages, but sometimes things change. And so, but people got that after a while. And so, again, after 20 years of multiple conflicts, I think we have a very good understanding of each other, the CIA in particular, and the special operations community in the military.
20 plus years led to this book here, Clarity in Crisis. And it's basically like a leadership type book. And it's fantastic. It's super short. You guys can read this thing. And there's so much great stuff. And I don't know if I have a higher compliment than this, Mark. I wish I would have wrote this book.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thanks.
So good. It's so great. And there's so many times where I stopped and I'm like, yep. And I think we approach the job slightly differently. And even though we have the same job between coding thinkers, we have totally different approaches, totally different clients, totally different everything. I'm tactical. I'm not necessarily worried about tomorrow. I'm worried about today, right now. How do I reduce harm to the unit that I'm in?
Yep.
And I'm not trying to ever go to an embassy, but I am trying to meet the right people. And I have to meet a lot of people to find the right people. So I think it's a different approach, the tactical approach, to more of your, I guess I'll say strategic, although you did a lot of tactical work. But how would you characterize the difference between what maybe I did and what you did? Do you have any sense for, like, on your end, how it's different than how the military did?
Well, sure. I mean, so, it's ultimately, I'm looking at perhaps plans and intentions of the Taliban senior leadership. Right. And we'd have an Army human team, sometimes co-located with us, and we're fine with that because they're looking at force protection issues with the base. Right. And so, and when you marry that up together, it can be very effective. Now, here's what happens. Sometimes in my job, spotting, assessing, developing, recruiting, handling assets, I'll find someone who might have some tactical intel. Well, I'm going to hand it over to the Army human team. On the other side, the Army sometimes, or U.S. military, intel collectors, again, focus on the tactical, might find someone really who has access to strategic plans and intentions, and then you pass that on. And so it can, the fact of the matter is, if you kind of have that synergy, it can work really well. And then sometimes there's conflict, and you just kind of work it out. I mean, that's the other thing too, is there's always, when I first got involved with this, I'd go into an Army unit, and there would be jokes saying, "Oh, watch your wallet. Here's the CIA guy."
Right.
That didn't happen. By the end of our 20-year kind of adventure, that did not happen. And so, because people were just much more comfortable with each other, and I think that's important.
Tom's got a great question about AI, and I want to get to that in a minute. But first, I want to back up to what you're saying. It's not uncommon. If you're doing your job, there's a couple of things that are going to happen on the Army side. And one of them is the enemy starts to use you as a target. Your reports should be coming up like, hey, Pete is out there Mark is out there. We got to find out who these guys are. Anybody who bags either one of those guys gets a bag of money. That means you're playing the game. If people don't know who you are, this is one of the things that drives me crazy when people talk about bounties and combat zones. Of course, like our job is to be known enough that we are a problem for them, because that means that it's starting to hurt that we're there. The other thing is if you're doing your job well, guys like you, guys from the DIA or somewhere else, they're going to show up and they're going to say, hey, who is it? Tell me about this guy that you're talking to, because maybe they have a different view as to like what needs to happen. And so a lot of my peers in the Army side would be upset because they lost right. A source to somebody else. I'm like, hey, I'll go find another one. If I'm valuable to you guys, you've got more resources than I have, and you have the ability to do things I can't do. And I'm going to meet somebody new tomorrow anyhow. So you take that person if you think they're valuable and go with it. But that's a rare thing. There's a lot of institutional jealousy going back.
There is, there definitely is. And, the stealing sources is always kind of the gripe that folks have. But, again, it's just personal relationships. It's working things out. I mean, I'll never forget, in Baghdad, running into a DIA collector who I'd worked with, a couple years earlier. And, I was actually bringing in a high value target into the tactical operations center. And there I see my friend there smiling. He's the he's the debriefer. I got to be careful if I say interrogator. It's probably a bad word now, but he's the debriefer. And so, you just know people from over the years, and it works out just fine. And then the other part, which is, the kind of secret in all this, is that there's a whole lot of Army intel folks who end up coming and joining the agency. And so there's a lot of people who started off doing Army humans, ended up going to CIA, which means what? It means they know people. And so you have that personal introduction. And so even if there's institutional rivalries, if you got people to kind of broker those personal ties, that means everything.
Yeah, and if you're good, you're good, right? And if you're good, other people recognize it. And if they're at the CIA or DIA or FBI, wherever they're at, like, oh, that guy's good. Yeah, I heard about it, because it is a small community. Even though you can be completely unknown at the same time. I mean, I was so far out. I knew more warlords than I knew CIA people.
But you raised something interesting before, and I think it's worth a discussion about cover. And so, and of course, cover reasons, there are cover concerns for us and maybe more traditional, very kind of critical counterintelligence places. But you're right, when it comes to the war zones, like you're out there overturning rocks, and you're going to have to meet a lot of people. And some of them are going to be making stuff up. Some of them are going to be double agents sent at you. And it's your role to vet them. But when it comes to kind of, the idea of, as you said before, bounties or cover concerns in a war zone, I think that's thrown out the window in a big way. You have to be out there. I was, wherever it was, actually, one of the things I would love, when I was either in a war zone, but also in a traditional CIA station, is you want your case officers to be the smartest people on that country, period. And it can be human. It doesn't matter if it's from DIA or from CIA. It's your collectors. I don't want them in the embassy or on the base. I can't stand that. I don't want to see you. You got to be gone on the street all the time. And one of the proudest moments for me, there was, and it's a true story. I remember, it's not a political statement one way or the other. Nancy Pelosi came to visit. She's Speaker of the House, came to visit a station I was in the Middle East. And the ambassador literally said, hey, the smartest person in this country is Mark. I was the deputy station chief. And that, and then I ended up kind of, giving, very significant briefings to the congressional delegation. But to me, that was really telling. And I was proud of that, because that's what you want your officers to be. They have to be the smartest persons in that country, period. They own it. You own the street. And that's what I tell my officers all the time.
One of the things I learned along the way, it makes me really different than the standard military collector. And I think collectors in general, in terms of human, is I didn't focus on threat. I stopped doing it in Bosnia, and I just didn't worry about it, because in the Army sense, there's a lot of things we have to do. One of the line items I'm worried about is force protection. And there's a zillion questions. Everybody is focused on that. SIGINT, IMINT, other human assets, everybody's focused on that. And there's all this intel just all across the field just waiting to be picked up and processed. And so because I would say, look, I'm here to grab information. And if they ask me, are you a spy? I'd say, yes, I am. I'm here to find things out. And if I ask you a question you don't want to answer, don't answer it. I'm never going to trick you.
By the way, I can pay you too.
Yeah. By the way, Trent says spy right now, right? Because I wanted to be upfront and open, because I had to build trust more than anything else. If I got to carry a gun, if I got into a gunfight, there's only one of me, or I'm on a small team. I can't get in the gunfights. I've got to build trust in the community. I've got to understand culture at a level that no one else in my entire unit, and I mean brigade, RC South, I've got to be better at culture than all those guys. I've got to be better at working with interpreters than all those guys. I've got to be better at understanding who I'm talking to on a day-to-day basis and what's it like to be them. And so I never focused on threat, Mark. I focused on trust and the other areas. Like if we're trying to create a government that does something for the people, and it's not, the commander wants to know that, so that they can adjust how they do their operations. And it doesn't sound as sexy, but I'll tell you what, if you let me work with a battalion and they stayed there for a year, within a few months, they would completely adjust their entire focus based upon the intel I was providing them.
Right.
They still find all kinds of threat and bad guys. But the thing was, and you know this, on any given day, Afghanistan, Iraq, most dangerous place in the world, 50 people dead in a car bomb attack. Okay, you might find that needle in the haystack and prevent that. You might. But every day, what are you going to do? How are you going to contribute to the fight? Hey, no one here is going to call the police ever, sir, ever. They don't think of it. And they're like, what do you mean they're not going to call the police? Well, how do we fix that problem? Well, that's a different question. Let me go find out. Right. And now all of a sudden you're working on an institutional kind of problem at a tactical level.
Yep.
How do we improve the connection to the government? How do we, where is what we're doing working? Where is the government clicking on all cylinders? Where is there more security and less? The perception of security, all these things, no one even bothers to ask the question. And it's vital to the success of the national success, the local unit success, on and on and on. Does that in any way sound foreign to you?
No, 100%. It's true. And one of the things that I kind of tried to steer away from, and this is going to sound terrible, but the intelligence, game has to do with numbers, right? Numbers of intelligence reports that are disseminated in the community. Well, if you get caught up in threat reporting, you have what's called the self-flicking ice cream cone.
Yeah, right.
And so we can put out 100 reports a month about all the people who want to attack our base because we're there. Of course they want to attack the base. Yeah. And so, in certain places where I went, I wanted to change that, and of course, go after kind of our medium and high value targets. I mean, one of the things, the bases I ran in Afghanistan were very, very focused on the HVT hunt. Right. Our job was to obtain, information on the location to put, frankly, on the X, Taliban and Al Qaeda members. And while the stats of our threat reporting were great, that's kind of irrelevant because, again, I would say that, of course, they're going to try to attack us because we're there. And once we leave, there's no threat. And so it's really kind of, I wanted to shift focus away from on those numbers to actually locational information on high value targets, which frankly, when it came to Al Qaeda and the Taliban, that was a strategic, collection goal for us. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't local Taliban trying to attack us. It was, where is, Al Qaeda senior leadership or Taliban senior leadership? And that's how I shifted focus kind of away from that self-licking ice cream cone, which drove me nuts.
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to say about this self-licking ice cream cone. One is just to understand how hard this is for Mark and I to find these high-value targets. You don't kill one every day. You might go knock down a door every day, and you might arrest the wrong people 5 times. You might arrest the right people 10 times, and no one goes to jail. So to actually get a high-value target and do something with them, that's a once in a tour, once in a bunch of tours kind of thing where you really get somebody and you're like, we made a difference in the battle. It's just very, very hard to find. Meanwhile, again, every day there's intel work to do. A guy, you'll know who this guy is. Now, when I was in Afghanistan, a guy named Mullah Omar lived 2 miles from where we all lived, the cluster of base camps. We never had a real hint that he was there. It was always like, well, he could be here. He's from this area. No shit. His house that he lived in was not even a long patrol, a very short patrol, but we never even got a whiff of him. And everybody's focused on this guy because he is one of the prime Taliban guys. That's how hard it is. And it's not incapacity. It's because you're playing a game and they're like, this is our king. We're protecting him. You're not going to get anywhere near him. And we didn't.
Takes a long time to find HVTs. There's no doubt. I mean, look at the hunt for bin Laden. I was it's really interesting. I have some friends who literally spent an entire decade. That's all they did. It's pretty extraordinary. I was having this conversation the other day with someone, and a really good friend of mine who was an operations officer. That's what he did for 10 years. And so what we focused on was kind of so of course, the raid on bin Laden was an enormous kind of, operation for the intelligence community. But on a personal level, this is someone who, when it was said and done, kind of sat back and said, wow, it took 10 years of my life. And this is not serving in Paris or in Berlin or in London. It was all in South Asia. It was all away from home. It was disruptive to families' lives.
Oh my God.
And so pretty extraordinary, and this is not to make a comment on the movie Zero Dark 30, but there's a great scene in Zero Dark 30 when all is done and the female agency officer is just kind of staring out the back of a C-130 because basically it's, okay, what now what? I just dedicated my entire life to this. But to me, I got that. I really do because, again, and I talk about it in the book, this is not a 9-to-5 job. And if and I would tell new officers all the time. I was deputy operations chief for the Middle East, and then I was the acting operations chief for Europe and Eurasia. And I would love meeting new officers because I would tell them, this ain't a 9-to-5 job, and most of the work is done at night. And you're going to dedicate a tremendous amount of your life to this business. And if that you can't do that, that's okay. But on the operational side, we work at night, so get used to that. And that's just something that you always want to have work-life balance. I got much better at that at the latter stages of my career, particularly with kind of a new generation who do demand that, and that's good. Because a lot of us are broken after these last 20 years.
Seriously.
But it's not a 9-to-5 job, and it does it's a pretty extraordinary line of work, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. A lot of ups and downs, as I talk about in the book, a lot of failure, a lot of failing, not failure, but you learn a lot about adversity. Just
about to bring this up. That chapter on adversity is fantastic. And again, when I say I wish I would have wrote this book, and I may still write my own version of this book, but I always say if my life is a bonsai tree, I've snipped all the branches off that are mistakes, and all I have left is this stick. Because I've made all the mistakes. I've watched units come in. I've overplayed my hand. I've underplayed my hand. I've all of the mistakes. This job is born out of mistakes. And then my solution, my approach to doing this, and yours, we're going to overlap some, but there's going to be a whole lot of area where you're going to look at me. And look, we've both have been in meetings where it wasn't our meeting. We're watching another agent or another handler or another whatever at work. And we're like, that is not in any way the way I would take this conversation. But you're not in charge. So you sit back and you watch and you learn. Right. You're smart. And you're like, well, I didn't have that tool in my bag yesterday, but I sure as hell got that tool in my bag today, because they get there if they're good.
That's right. Look, well, first of all, this is not a science. Everything is so subjective, particularly in running agents. One of the things that I always, and I talk a lot about failing in the book, and I talk a lot about adversity, and the biggest trait that I think for any operations officer, which is humility. But ultimately, the one thing that I didn't allow for was kind of ethical lapses. And so, when you walk into CIA headquarters, on the right is the memorial wall, which is kind of sacrosanct, 137 stars on there, a lot over the last 20 years. And on the left, there's a biblical verse, and it says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And a lot of people, I guess, when they think about CIA, certainly don't equate honesty, adversity, and the organization. But that's all you got, and because at the end of the day, I was watching the other night. I was watching the Baltimore police show called The Wire, and the last season, there's a journalist who's making up stories, and I reflect on that because as a CIA operations officer or as an Army, U.S. military operations officer, a case officer, you're out there alone. All you have is your ethics and integrity, and so to me, that was everything. And I had to trust the people. And there's obviously a vetting process that we go through. And bringing people on board, but ethical lapses I would not tolerate. Making a mistake, I've made a whole bunch of them, and some of them are really bad. And as long as you learn from them, I think that's going to be, when I talk about adversity, that's going to be your super fuel in the future. I mean, I love that. It's a silly example, but it's true. Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team as a sophomore in high school. I think he did okay after that. Yeah. And so, but ultimately, for me, failing was okay as long as you learn from it and you do that properly. But ethical stuff, that to me, we can't have that, particularly in a business when you operate and work alone.
Ethics is hard in combat, man. It's hard because you reach ethical saturation where what you want to be ethical no longer is reliably so. So like one of the things that gets thrown at us is if you see men sexually assaulting boys, we're supposed to do something about that and have the trait, which doesn't exist. It's a PowerPoint slide. It's not a real thing. And I know it's adorable that you think it's easy to go deal with this and just stand there with my cape and stop some kind of man rape. But culturally, that's their norm. And also, I have to walk down that trail the next day, and the next day and the next day. So I've got certain things that I have to let happen because that is how they do things here. Does it make it right? No. Does it make it right there? No. But it's also not my job. It's actually inappropriate for me to go and try to. I wrote a whole paper, an academic paper on how the inappropriateness of us engaging females at all, and Pete, women, whatever it is, because we don't take that task seriously. And so the only thing we can really do, even though we think it's ethical, the only thing we can really do is ensure that we don't cause any more harm to females because we think we know their condition without ever bothering to understand it. And that ethical problem is hard because that makes us what we think is this is ethical saturation. What we think is ethical is not. And so you have something where you're like, here is a problem that we are causing, and we're making life worse. We have to stop as an institution, CIA, military, State Department, whatever it is, and adjust, because just because we want women to be farmers and quilt makers doesn't mean that we have a path to reliably do that without causing more harm than good.
So, the whole issue of course, this is Afghanistan, and it certainly happened in the Pashtun areas where I spent the year,
right?
Of kind of having young T-boys, in our indigenous units.
Yeah.
Boy, that was tough.
Yeah.
I knew it was going on. Now these are, so I ran an outfit with 20 Americans and 1,000 Indige fighters. And our job was to take it to, the Taliban and Al Qaeda. One of the things I would go to our commanders, our indigenous commanders, and I say, look, I know that you all are doing this. Just try to do it a little more, away from all of us, because it's making the Americans feel uncomfortable. We have wildly different norms on this. But I certainly was not, and this was hard because, you want to do the right thing, but I wasn't the police there to try to stop that behavior. I said, just kind of just please don't do this in front of us. It's making everyone uncomfortable. And we kind of came to this understanding. I actually don't know if that's the right thing or not, but we had a mission to do.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot in the press written about this, and there's a lot of people, who are smart in the media have condemned kind of U.S. forces or intelligence, operators for kind of allowing this. But I don't know what else we're going to do when we come to a culture which is so vastly different than ours. Now, if I ever saw something happen with my eyes, I would stop it.
Right.
But I'm also not going to do barracks checks every night. As we're on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, 6,000 miles from the United States, with 20 Americans and 1,000 indigenous fighters. I mean, so you come to kind of, you do the best you can, but I don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah, and again, this goes back to the whole thing. Like, if you are undercover, if you're working on the tip of the spear, the things that you think are normal, sitting on a couch or behind a desk, they just don't apply. I got invited to we'll just call it a party with the Afghan service members, and it was hyper homoerotic, dudes dancing on top of dudes.
I've been there.
It wasn't meant to be gay. It was how they dealt with it. And you got to realize, like, not only these guys far removed from home and in a dangerous place where they're not welcome, there also is no sexual outlet. You can't date anybody. Everything is pent up, and you're 18 or 19 years old, and everything that has been pent up, it's just not an area where you can deal with it. And so to put our norm on there, it's inappropriate, and the cultural problem that we have in trying to understand what a different society, where they're at, and then where they're capable of getting to, is nothing to do with where we want them to be. They're totally separate lines that you can maybe eventually fence them together, but to start with the presumption that you know how to fix or you know how to improve someone's life without knowing their life and not being willing to go do the hard ass work. Look, you and I both know 20-hour days. Come on, all the time. 36-hour days. Come on, all the time.
Sure. I mean, I remember the Afghans, and some of these were really heroic, agents of ours. They didn't know how to read. They didn't know how to write. They couldn't tell kind of cardinal direction. I mean, so it's and again, this is not Afghanistan as a whole. There's very, if you served in Kabul at the embassy or maybe at ISAF headquarters, there was much more cosmopolitan Afghans who were very well educated.
Yeah,
we were in kind of Pashtun land, and people didn't know how to read, write, tell cardinal direction. It was as basic as you can get, and so you have to, but that's what unconventional war. That's what UW is. Unconventional warfare is adapting to the location where you're at, and you just kind of try to do the best you can.
I want to bring in Tom's question from earlier because I think AI is fascinating. But before I do that, I want to mention again, this is Marc's book right here, Clarity in Crisis. It's leadership lessons from the CIA. And when I say this, and the reason why I spent so much time talking about the field initially is you have to understand how gritty, how truthful what Marc is saying and doing is. And then he relates it back to his family. He relates it back to baseball and all these other things. And he doesn't say like, no shit, there I was. He's like, hey, I made a lot of mistakes. And then I kept making mistakes. And, we learn in this way. But AI in trying to process the information that we get, Marc, I've always impressed, like if you typed in some Arabic term name, Muhammad, Ali Muhammad, and you're like, who is this guy? You would have so much data. You could never true through it all? And did you spell Muhammad, or is it Muhammad? Is it Hamid? Is his nickname Abu, bad guy? Whatever. All this stuff, it's so hard for analysts to be able to process that. And then that turns into operational questions, which are handed to us, like, help us find this thing or help us understand this fact. And I think it's also interesting, you have to say this as well, like, as this institution, this multi-institution kicks out questions to guys like you and me, I may have no earthly clue what you're talking about, even if it's a guy from my area, because I can only do so much, like, I can't know everybody. I can give you a guess. I can try to find out. But if you think it's like question in, answer out, I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't work that way.
So, the biggest challenge for the intelligence community now is data. There's no doubt about that. And, how we adapt is going to determine whether or not the intelligence community is relevant or not. One of the things that I've looked at and I'm amazed by is the success of open source intelligence firms like Bellingcat, who I think are extraordinary because, in many ways, they are beating the ice of the intelligence community in their ability to, collect data, how they do it and how they analyze it. And so, we certainly risk being left behind. But, I remember when Bill Burns, the current CI director, was getting confirmed, he talked a lot about data and how AI, has to be harnessed. I mean, I know, look, the agency, even when I left in 2019, was started to hire data scientists, which is really important. But the amount of data out there is extraordinary. And then, perhaps, a good segue. This is a good segue into how does an operations officer, how does a collector, deal with kind of the unique counterintelligence environments now with things such as data, things such as smart cities, with biometrics. I mean, the idea of traveling an alias, much more difficult. Even when you go off on a surveillance detection route, in the past, sometimes you left your phone behind. Well, you can't do that. Phone's got to be on, but it can't be on your person, but it's got to be on. But guess what? It better be doing the same things it was doing when you're sitting there tweeting about the Washington Nationals every night. Because if you're not doing it, someone's watching that phone. So, when it comes to data, how we do our jobs, things have gotten harder. I still maintain, and I will, till I die, that, the U.S. intelligence community will always be able to meet a human agent. It's just a lot harder now. Yeah. But we'll be able to do it because we have to. Because in my view, and this is, obviously I'm biased. I'm not a SIGINT guy or gal. But there's nothing that's going to ever beat, a penetration of a terrorist group or of an adversary, because you can sit there across from them. You can task them. You can pick your brain. So it's not like signals intelligence. It's not like imagery or ISR collection. And so ultimately, data and kind of advent of smart cities and kind of explosion in biometrics makes our job a lot harder. I still think we can do it, and I hate when people kind of say human is dead. There's a lot, and there is some really good journalists who write on this, but I think they're being a little sensationalist. So I'm comfortable saying that our job is much harder, but I said it to policymakers until I retired in July of 2019 that the CIA can meet a human agent anywhere. It's just harder, but we can do it.
It also requires things that institutions are uncomfortable with. It requires freedom for a guy like you or me. We need to be in foreign countries so that we can be in foreign countries a lot more naturally. Everybody always like, well, how did you blend in? I didn't try to blend in. I don't, that's not my job in my case, right? My job is to either be with the Army or doing something that's so specific, and the danger is metered out as best as possible. But like, I've gone off the camp by myself with somebody else, hyper small units that really have no combat capacity, just a radio so you can call to maybe get help, right? So it is hard to do. But if you want to find someone who finds that Taliban person who's on the fence, who has too much straw on their back, and their boss gives them that last piece of straw, and they're like, I'll be damned if I'm going to be damned by this. You need someone like us who's there, that doesn't mind drinking shots or doesn't mind going out and dealing with the danger, because they can be there to meet that person. And you don't meet that person by saying, I always say the worst way to find bombs is to say, where are the bombs? Like, it just doesn't work. You never say that. You go out and you become a good dude to know. And you start to slowly build a network where someone's like, hey, I know someone, maybe. And they look around. This is the international symbol of like, I'm going to tell you something. That's the same in every language. They look around and they're like, I know a guy who's in the Taliban who I think maybe wants to, not be a problem anymore, or whatever they say. Now you have a chance at that conversation. It's impossible to do that with Twitter, with SIGINT, with IMINT, with OSINT. There's not enough ints if you don't have human be on the ground.
I agree completely, and again, that's why of course we're two collectors talking now, so yeah. I'm always gonna be biased towards that, but look, at the end of the day, it's a job about relationships with our assets. I have to throw one thing in here, just because of the word agent, it drives me nuts. Every program I ever go on is that CI officers, I was not an agent. Right. I was a case officer, an operations officer. Agents are those who we recruit. They are foreigners who we recruit. I was reading the New York Times yesterday, and they were doing there's some great new books out on espionage, and they did a book review, and they did the same thing about this, a CIA agent in Damascus, and it drives me nuts. And so that might, if anything, my role in life now after 26 years of the CIA, I'm just going to educate the world that not to call us an agent. We were officers, and the agents are the ones who we recruit. So.
Technically, in the Army, I am an agent. I'm a special agent.
Right.
Sure.
Yep.
But same job, but our jobs are so different. Like, you can be counterintelligence and not have anything to do with your peer who's a counterintelligence agent. And sometimes we're law enforcement. So I understand the confusion, but I also understand that if you're going to critique something at a professional level, you better damn well know a case officer. I mean, you don't got to know what MOTSI is and all that kind of stuff, but you do need to get that nomenclature right. And then I'll say this too. I often say, yes, I was a spy. And then our peers will say, no, you weren't. You were a collector. And I'm like, no. Take it from the other side. If I am walking into a village in Afghanistan, what do they think I am? Well, they think you're a spy. Like, well, then let's just leave that at that, because that's where I spend most of my time. That's where I'm most in danger. And if I think I'm something other than what I am to them, well, now I'm really in danger. And so the nomenclature thing is hard. And if we get arrested in that country, they're not going to say, this guy is a case officer.
They're going to say he's a spy, right? Yep.
I wanted to ask you about the book, because, again, all kinds of great lessons in here. Let's talk about the chapter when you discuss how performing, and look, people in our field die. There's all those stars on that right side wall, and you still have to do your job. You still have to look someone in the face who maybe took part in the assassination of your friend or whatever. We still have to go out and deal with things. And this is a deadly game. And not all the time, but often enough that you can never discount the threat that's all around you. And also, you talked about SDRs, and I want to bring this part in too. That comfort in telling the machine, hey, today is not the day for this meeting. And it's something as simple as traffic. Yep. Right. So let's talk about these aspects of the things that get in the way, and the danger and everything else that goes into this, because it's on our shoulders, man. It's on our shoulders to get this stuff right.
Right. So the contention of the book is that one can lead in times of crisis if you get comfortable. Being in that place of gray where you have a lack of situational awareness. That was my happy place. Mm-hmm. It took a long time to get there, and I kind of tried to figure out why. And there was 9 fundamental principles that I followed in how I built teams that allowed me in times of crisis, when situational awareness has gone kind of to crap. Your leadership is nervous, and you're sitting there. You're like, "We got this." And one of them, one of the principles, I call it the process monkey, and it's very simple. For a CIA case officer, I'll say for an Army human, it's what we call a surveillance detection route. So there are certain things that you have to do. For us to go meet an agent, we have to do we have to get black. We have to be clean. That means no one can be following us. So you do things that can take 45 minutes. It can take 3 days. But ultimately, you go out in the street. It's very simplistic. You make a ton of turns. Maybe you get in disguise, maybe you change your clothes, maybe you change your mode of transportation, but ultimately it's getting to your meeting with your agent, who you have their life in their hands, and no one followed you. And so when I talk about the process monkey, is for us, for an intelligence officer, that is an indispensable. It is critical that you do this. For a Navy SEAL, you got to be able to shoot, or special force, so whatever. It doesn't, you can come up with a lot of different things. But I tell the story in the book where I was in a North African country, and I was off on a surveillance detection route, going to meet an agent who, of course, because it's always the case, Langley, Washington, was really clamoring for the information. So there was a lot of anticipation for this meeting, and off I go. And just like everything else that happens in this North African Middle Eastern country, traffic, Murphy's Law hits, and there's tons of traffic. Now, I have kind of timing hacks and places I have to be to make certain turns, to stops. So again, I'm trying to detect surveillance. I'm missing this. And I realize about, a third or halfway through that I'm not going to make this. I can't do what I have to do to make sure my agent's safe. So what I ended up doing is I abort the meeting. You don't go. And I come back to the office. And what the most interesting, this is a true story. The interesting part about it is I walk in and the chief of station's like, start writing. How was the meeting? Start writing. I said, I missed it. I said, tons of traffic. I couldn't run my SDR properly. And his response was, got it, no problem. Like, when's the fallback? So we have, plus 24, plus 48 hours. We're going to meet the agent again. It's not the end of the world, but he got it because he understood that that's a fundamental part of the job, is keeping our agents safe. And so when I say the process monkey is in times of crisis, when you're leading, if you know your team has done the fundamentals, you're going to feel a lot better about because you built that team, so you got it. Now if the team didn't do that, if they're not following those rules, then you're like, okay, this isn't good. But if you build the right kind of team, you have those fundamentals down. And and when people hear the word process, they get nervous because it's like it's some. But I also would kind of add that you can certainly innovate on this. And a perfect example is, okay, a surveillance detection route in the Middle East. You're having some trouble with traffic. Hey, how about instead of using a vehicle, a car, why don't you use a bike, a motorcycle? You're going to do the same thing. You're going to get yourself black. You're going to make sure no one's following you, but you don't have the traffic. So innovation is really important too, because people hear process and freak out. But it's just these, it's you got to trust the process. There are some things you cannot take shortcuts on. And for us, the surveillance detection route was one of those.
You're right. And there's a lot of areas like that where that minutia matters. And it's one of the reasons why the job is so hard and takes so long to do. You have to write the reports. You have to prep for the next mission. You have to go out on the mission. You have to, the mission may take 12 hours because something else happens. You may find a bomb along the way and you sit there for 6 hours. I love it in the movies when the bomb squad comes in 10 minutes and 8 minutes later, the bomb is gone. Like, that's just like, it's not possible. One of the things that we see inexperienced agents, whether they've been in the business forever and ever, they all have big egos. We all think we know how to do it, but then you read the report and you're like, this meeting one report, you didn't get anything. Like, if you're going to put someone's life in your hands and you're going to run them as a source, you'd better understand that person at a level that starts from meeting one. Okay, I know you met this person and you want to go meet them again, but you're going to have to satisfy these very basic elements of who the hell they are.
Right.
Before you're ever on meeting two. And I know you think, and that was the thing, I used to teach counterintelligence, force protection, and source operation at Fort Huachuca. And we had SDRs because that's a skill you've got to always practice to be good at it.
Right.
And we were in Tombstone, and I'm playing the source. I'm like a local government person, and the agent wants me to walk around. I live in Tombstone. He wants me to walk around like the block in Tombstone. And then come and meet him somewhere. And it didn't make any sense. The SDR was assigned to me, and he was going to make sure I was black individually, right? And none of this stuff's classified because it's all training stuff. You can look up SDRs on the
That's right.
But I see him across the square trying to check me out as I walk. And so I just beeline over to him. I walk catty corner across the intersection. And he's like, hey, I told you to go around the block at Bid Nose Kate's. I'm like, yeah, but I saw you here. I'm not just going to walk around and ignore you. Why? And I was still in character. I'm like, why? I wasn't going to do that anyhow. Why would I do that? You didn't give me a reason. Some American told me to go walk around the block. I don't think so. And he's like, what do I do about that? And we had to break and start like a training moment there. Like, your SDR has to make sense. It just isn't just your route. Like, why would they make this turn? And these are the little things that make everything happen at the big level. If you don't know who your source is, if you don't know why they pick white colored socks before you pitch them, then you have no business pitching.
So, it's interesting because in that case, obviously the case officer didn't explain why someone was running an SDR, which is ultimately to keep them safe. I tell a story in the book, and I worked really well with the CIA's Publication Review Board. They actually, there was a couple of redactions here and there, but they were very liberal in kind of letting me tell my story. But I tell a great story about an agent from Middle Eastern country who I was training in Europe on kind of communication procedures and SDRs before he went back into his country, which was a really high critical counterintelligence threat. and the story I tell, which is kind of goes to the fundamental basis of what we did as operations officers. He said to me, he goes, Mark, look, I know that we're going to meet probably once or twice a month, and it's going to be a big, elaborate, production. And I get it. We're training on this now. And I know you have other things to do. And I know he joked, he goes, I know you'll be watching, Armed Forces Network in the middle of the night, trying to watch, NFL football games on Sunday. This guy knew about a lot about America. And And he goes, but make no mistake. And he goes, so he said, you'll think of me every once in a while because you have to, because I know I'm important to you all. But he goes, make no mistake, I'm going to think about you every single day when I go back to my country. Because if you make one mistake, not only am I going to die, but my family, my tribe is going to die. Right. And so I'm going to think of you every day. And as a young operations officer, this really struck me. And I took the story and I told it all the time. Because, what kind of job in life, and it starts when you get out of training and you meet your first agent, what kind of job do you have where every time you go out in the street to meet an agent, you have someone's life in your hands? And it's a pretty extraordinary responsibility. And so what he was telling me is like, hey, you got to be really good. I'm going to ask you to be perfect. I know that's not possible, but you got to be perfect. Because if you make one mistake, I might die. And so I think that's extraordinary. And that's, if you talk about, I joked about before, it's not a 9-to-5 job. Well, it's not also a job where if you make a mistake one day, not on your sales pitch in an advertising agency, not when you're an accountant and you got a number wrong. If you make a mistake, someone can lose their life. And so it's pretty extraordinary responsibility. And I always called it, we weren't dealing with a Psych 101 class, it's a Psych 501 class. And so that to me was the most amazing part of the job. And just like everything else, I got promoted up and out, and my agent handling days, dwindled as I got senior, and I was promoted to senior intelligence service, and I missed it terribly because being a line case officer was actually the most fun I've ever had in my life, most rewarding, and so and just that responsibility that we have to our agents was extraordinary, and still is.
I love the book, man. And again, I'm going to encourage anybody, because it's told through the story, the lens of a spy. And as a spy, I'm telling you right now, this thing it's great. And there's a lot of lessons in here. We can just continue to go through the book, or I think we're doing a good job of covering why it's important by just having these anecdotes going back and forth. So the process, right? The process is the doctrinal process. And like you said, okay, I drove a car, and then God showed up and inshallah and said, no, you're not going to have this meeting.
Right.
So you said, hey, maybe I'll ride a bike. One of the things I learned, and this is not on topic, and I also want you to layer in having top cover from a boss, because I've literally been on my way out of theater. I made a colonel. I made an 06 MAD. He wasn't the commander, but he ran an ag team, and he was going to have me. He was going to use his influence, and I was a hill he was going to die on. And what saved me was I had the truth on my side. When my boss, who had plenty of ass, he's like, you can go keep getting in trouble because you deal in the truth, and I'll take the ass chewings for you. And that's a collector. I'm like, oh man, if I've got his buy-in, and if the boss likes what I'm doing, now you've turned me loose, because I'm only going to, and look, you might have to refocus me because I'm hyper-focused away out there on the ground. Maybe I need to be redirected over here, but you're going to get exactly what's out there from me. You're not going to get the party line. So part of what I learned we had to do was, because Afghanistan and Iraq were so impermissible for everybody, day to day, no danger, but on the bad day, all the danger. I started just looking at the government leaders I was working with and just giving them all the respect in the world. Like, hey, if you come to the camp, you're going to walk right in as a VIP. You're not going to be inspected. You're going to be saluted and thanked for showing up. If we have a meeting, you're going to set the meeting. You're going to tell me when and where you want to be, and we're going to handle this like a business meeting, because then I could allow that person the trust. I'd extend them trust at a high risk level, and they would say, here's how we can safely meet. I'm going to come pick you up. And this will sound crazy to everybody. I'm going to come pick you up from the American camp with my guys. I'm going to bring you to my office. We'll have a meeting for about 90 minutes, and then we're going to take you back. That sounds insane. I wasn't underestimating the risk. I only did this after I had provable and tested trust. But that was the best way to meet with these guys and get introduced to people that nobody else would get introduced to, because it wasn't on my terms. It wasn't surprise, I'm showing up. It was, you have a schedule, you have a lot of things to do. How do we work within your schedule and keep your risk low? And I allowed them, Mark, to help manage their own risk when they interacted with me. And it paid off in spades. I'm still alive. It worked out. Maybe I got lucky, but I feel like I did it by seeing us overplay our security at the expense of everybody else's too much.
So I think, I think it all depends, like, the famous words of any intelligence officer, for untested, agent candidates, I wouldn't do that.
Hyper advanced.
And so, for recruited agents, I mean, I think it just, the agency had a terrible incident, of course, in December 30th, 2009 in Coast Afghanistan, where we had an untested agent candidate, come on base who was not searched properly and killed 7 of our officers. So that is always going to be in the back of our mind. We have to be super careful on that. Now, does that mean that, if you're going to meet, the governor of the province, are you going to undertake those security measures again? I think it just depends. So, ultimately, for me, especially after the events in Coast, we were hyper vigilant on keeping our officers safe. There's ways to do this. There's ways to do this using kind of indigenous personnel to do first searches. There's ways to do this, perhaps via, lack of a better term, metal detectors and things like that. But that incident for us in Afghanistan in December 30th, 2009 was pretty traumatic, because that's someone that we needed to have searched and we did not. A little bit different than if it was a senior political leader, from a province, and you just got this is why you're kind of paid to make these kind of calls, paid to make and because if you're wrong, the consequences can be catastrophic. So everything else in life is risk versus gain. And that's how I think each operation is different. Each operation you have to approach differently. And even with agents who are vetted, they can go bad as well. So you just gotta assess things as they go along. I'm pretty sure that when we were meeting the Afghan president, that we weren't asking Hamid Karzai to be searched. But on the other hand, especially on counterterrorism operations, a lot of ultimately we have to meet individuals who claim access to information. Then kind of the security procedures are have to be pretty strict. So again, like everything else, just depends.
Yeah, it does just depend. And the reason why I bring that up is there's a spectrum of it depends. Oh, here's my spectrum. It's nice and wide. And look, we're desperate to know the worst, most evil people in that region, and get as close to them as we can. And that means you're going to have to deal with dangerous situations. And, there's no infantry commander out there that is like, I don't take any risk. Like you said, if it's Hamid Karzai, when Speaker Pelosi showed up, said, I promise you didn't get searched. So how are we going to look at someone from the actual government we're from, who is a representative there, and say, hey, we're going to search you? Like you have to respect at some point their sovereignty. And again, I'm giving context to the decision of this person's going to walk on the camp. It wasn't every person. These are people that I had extended trust to. We had tested trust. This is professional level work, hyper dangerous. But what we were doing was hyper dangerous. So it's just like saying, everything was black until Pete made this decision where everything was black. Like it's not none of it. It's always gray zone. And I promise the commanders all knew I was doing this. Like, these are the people I want to do. And here was the dividend. When you bring these senior tribal leaders on the camp and they're on their phone, they're talking. I got my interpreter there. He's listening. He's like, this guy is so busy. We've caught him on the wrong day. There are 5 new babies. There are this and that. And I'm like, just listen to what he says, take notes. And when he's got time, we're going to stuff his pockets full of muffins and ice cream and everything else and send him on his way. And we will now have a great friend in the villages, and we did. It worked every single time. These guys came on and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize you guys had air conditioning and free water. And like, we got ice cream. And ice cream is better than whiskey. And I like using whiskey a lot.
There you go.
Ice cream, Jesus, it works well.
No, it's the process of knowing your interlocutors. One of the things, in the book, I talked about kind of my journey to CIA, and I talked about when I was a young kid reading James Michener's book, Caravans, which is about a young foreign service officer in Afghanistan in the post World War II period. And then I remember when I first went to Afghanistan in February of 2002. I remember in Helmand province, I got dropped in with a special forces team. We're looking for a Taliban kind of medium value target, whatever. But I remember sitting across from some Afghan tribal members and thinking to myself, holy cow, I remember reading this book, a heck of a long time ago about Afghanistan. And so, that's what you have to do. And again, it's getting out. It's certainly you want to be always, whether you're an embassy or you're on a military base. I would joke with my officers, like, if you like Americans, you should have joined the FBI. You got to like foreigners. I mean this seriously. And so, the worst part about U.S. military bases overseas is that it's little America. You want to get off of that. So your job is to know foreigners. So I would, people always ask, what makes a good intelligence officer? I said, you have to have this kind of thirst for knowledge. But you got to like, you got to like foreigners and funny food and learning strange languages and learning about other religions. Your job is not to be back in little America or sitting at the embassy. I want you out in the street all the time. And I talk about one guy in the book. He was my mentor. His name was Charlie. His true name, his real name is Charlie. His last name Charlie Seidel. One of the great, Arabists in history for CIA. He's passed away now. But it's extraordinary because by the end of his career, he would walk. People knew him on the streets of Cairo or Baghdad or Amman, as well as the palaces. He was beloved because he loved the Arab world. He loved the Arab people. Spoke beautiful Arabic. Actually grew up in the Arab world because his dad was an intelligence officer as well. But this is the kind of true Arabist who just absolutely, loved the people and their religion and had respect for them. And Charlie was involved in a lot of controversial things. Like, he was the chief of station when we went into Iraq. But Iraqis loved him because they never saw him as the ugly American, because he spoke their language. He understood their culture. He was a great ambassador and representative of America. And that's what I would tell, young officers that, again, if you want to hang out with Americans, join the Bureau.
You're so right about this. This is one of the areas where we really fail, or at least our Army collectors, I'd say military collectors in general. We don't get them comfortable with the miscomfort of being in a foreign place. It's vital to be able to. So we get to a camp, and there's a special forces colonel there, and he's like giving us the lowdown. And he's like, and here we walking around hot, which means you have not just a loaded gun, but there's one in the chamber. He's like, we don't know. We've had the violence where the Afghan service member has shot the American. I mean, this happened on that tour for me. So this is a real thing. And then this is what Mark and I have to do. We're like, okay, this is a dangerous place. And you don't know. You can't walk around like looking like, who am I going to kill? Who's going to kill me? That doesn't work. Not for what we do. And I'm like, where's the Afghan chow hall? And they're like, it's in that building over there. Then I'm eating chow over there every goddamn meal. Every goddamn meal.
That's right.
And because if they're going to shoot me, they're going to shoot me up close, because there's no way for me to help if I'm terrified to go over there. Or if they had a gym. We worked out in their gym. We went over there and hung out with those dudes. Yep, you're not working, but you're not working,
No, look, we had 20 of us and 1,000 Afghan indige. So I loved, the meals we had with them. My predecessor, who is a tremendous officer, Mick Mulroy. Does a lot of stuff for ABC News now, and then he went off to the Pentagon after his agency career. I think he was a principal assistant secretary of defense. He started something there in Iraq and Afghanistan we called Fight Club. He's a big boxer, so he taught the Afghans how to box, which was wild. And so then we had literally Americans and Afghans. We were boxing with them, and first of all, some of them were good, but really fun. And again, it was living with them. And so, and now it's a little bit different with the agency's units. I mean, there was a level of vetting and trust, which is extraordinary. Sure. I often would never even carry a sidearm when I'm with them. And I don't know if that's right or wrong, but these folks had saved my butt so many different times. Again, and then I think the other part too is, look, if ultimately, if you're nice to everybody, maybe, and if God forbid there was, a green on blue incident, maybe they're not going to shoot you if you're nice to them. I don't know. But just be nice. I would that would always kind of cross my mind. Yeah, I remember him. Yeah, he acted kindly towards me. I don't know. But I think this is why some of there was a lot of, certainly amongst kind of my crowd, there was a lot of pain involved in watching the withdrawal from Afghanistan and our Afghan allies. Many of them left behind because, my tour in Afghanistan was 20 Americans, 1,000 Afghan indige. It was living with them.
Yeah.
And the idea that some of them, were kind of stuck inside was very hard to take. Because, when you go, again, it's unconventional warfare. So it's the same thing. You roll out on patrol, if there's a firefight, the Afghans are going to save you. Now you're gonna have we're gonna have some really good shooters with us, either from our paramilitary arm or maybe from a co-located special force team. But odds are our Afghan. I once told I can't remember who it is. It was a 3 or 4 star, and he came to visit after we had a huge firefight there, cross border incident. And I said, hey, I said, welcome to our base. Location of the finest fighting force in Eastern Afghanistan. And the U.S. general, the 3-star, he was totally taken aback. He's like, well, what U.S. military units are here? And I said, once again, let me tell you, the finest fighting force in Eastern Afghanistan are Afghan Indige units. And that's the way we really felt about them. And that's from living with them. And my memories of Afghanistan, my year there, have so much to do with the Afghans that I met. And our indigenous commander was killed when I was there. He's an absolute hero. He did like a little taste now and then, so I had a bourbon with him the night before. I think he'd been co-opted by us a little bit, but the next day he was killed in an IED strike. And some real grief on the part of the agency officers who knew what these units really did day in and day out, and undertaking their missions, which was kind of the fight against the Taliban and Al Qaeda. And so extraordinary bunch of folks, and that's why I think it caused a lot of pain, and still is painful to see them, some of them left behind.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And part of what we have to do, again, is we build trust, and that means we build love and understanding. Even with evil people, you're still trying to, identify with this person, because you have to always be building relationships and getting introduced to the next person. And when you said early on in this thing, this is not a 9-to-5 job. It is not. Like, hey, all you Army guys, go make your PowerPoint slide. I'm going to go sit with these Afghans for the next 4 hours and do whatever it is. Or look, Iraqis, other countries I can't mention. I hung out with Dr. Zawas in Egypt right after 9/11 in October of 2001. And I didn't probe him for anything other than just his knowledge about Egypt. And it was remarkable. But while everybody else was out doing fun stuff, he and I were sitting down on the museum cafeteria having chai, and he was just, talking, and I let him be him. And the rest of the time I was there, he would come seek me out. I was his buddy as long as I was there. And I could probably go see him right now, because that relationship was real. We have to do that no matter what, because of what it takes to get the information that keeps everybody safe.
That's right. 100%. I'm with you. I still have friends from all over the Middle East who call, on our house phone, which is a little alerting. But I'm retired now, so I think a lot of folks think it's okay. But it's the friends we made, and this is in my conventional postings as well. Really extraordinary.
I know we've been at an hour. Do you got another 5 minutes for me?
I do. 5 minutes.
You do these great things that are you can't see it. Yeah, in these little chapter summaries, and you call them Mad Minutes, which is straight crafty, and we love that. I love that you did that. One, where did that idea come from? And tell us what a Mad Minute is.
So the Mad Minute, and you of course, Pete, you know this very well. The Mad Minute is kind of the essential things that you have to do at the onset of an operational meeting, mostly having to do with communications. You never want to lose contact with your agent, with your asset, and so it's things like, okay, next meeting, and what's the recontact plan, and so what I took that kind of that fundamental 60 seconds that we as operations officers hold sacrosanct, because meetings get broken up. So let's say you pick someone up in a car. The first thing you say is, okay, we're going to meet next week or next month at this location, blah blah. Here's our combo plan, because what can happen? It can be a car accident. You can get pulled over. So I took that idea of the Mad Minute and put it towards the principles, and saying, like, look, if we have 60 seconds to talk about this principle, what are the 4 things I'm going to ask you? And so what I liked about it is I wanted to challenge the reader and say, okay, I talked to you about, my, humility is best served warm, or win an Oscar, these principles. I tell you what it is. I'll give you some more stories. Now you tell me, give me an example when you did this in your career. And when I do this in front of, it's been hard now with the pandemic. And so I've done these talks over Zoom, but when you do this in person, it's really fun because it's interactive. I just got back as an Army guy. You'll be upset. I just got back from giving 2 lectures at the Naval Academy.
Hey, all right.
On exactly this, on the book, on leadership. And I was challenging the midshipmen. Okay, we talked about process monkey. Got it. So in your life right now, as you're in your 3rd year there, and it's pretty chaotic what they're doing. Give me that, what is that? What is something fundamental you have to do every day? Now they're going to say things like sleep or eat or study. Doesn't matter, but you identify that. And so I love doing this stuff in person. And that's where that Mad Minute comes in, because it's fun, it's interactive. And that's when you get people kind of really kind of thinking about what I was talking about.
And then my final question on that, then, just because only a guy like me can ask you this question: why isn't the Mad Minute up front
In the book
of the chapter? Yeah,
that's a good point. I don't know. It could have been. Could have been for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's because the baseball stories are up front. One of the things is I'm a huge baseball fan. My son's still playing in college, and so I talk about his high school team. But I one of the things that I really enjoyed about writing this is that it's not an autobiography. It's certainly not. I'm not thumping my chest. Like I joke with all my friends from the SEALs, like, hey, you guys get your book deal at Bud's Training, and they get all pissed when I say that. But no, this is because it has to do with baseball and overcoming adversity in sports. But yeah, maybe I should have put the Mad Minute up front. That would have made more sense. But
every chapter, yeah, it's just a note. It still works.
Yeah.
I love it, man. I love what you're doing. I love that you're taking it. And you and I both, we see this. We see the humanity in what we do and how it applies to other things. I mean, everything we're talking about, having a Mad Minute, writing a bluff. I often write bluff right up, bottom line up front for anybody.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean by bottom line up front, I mean all the way up front. It doesn't mean 100 words of text. It means bam, here's why you're reading this thing.
Yep.
And those things, all these lessons come through building trust and everything. I don't know. Do you know Robin Dreek's work? He was an FBI counterintelligence.
I don't.
He and I both found that trust was our main fuel for how we did it. Yeah. Anyhow, listen, I appreciate you coming on. Anything in closing for us?
No, this has been really fun. First of all, great chat. I mean, I'm talking to a contemporary, so this is fun. There's a peer. I mean, we're talking the same language, but I really hope when people read the book, they get an idea of what the CIA was like, the role of an operations officer. Again, this is not pounding my chest. I talk about humility and adversity and failing, but I think it's real because that was the job that we had, and it certainly kind of applies in life. And then I hope. Some people who read this, are interested in a career in national security and the intelligence community, because, the whole thing is that what I got excited about at the end of my career, and certainly now, is passing the torch. Pete, I'm sure it's the same thing for you. So if we can get anyone, anyone who's watching or listening to this today, if one person says, you know what, I want to join the IC, then we did something good. Because passing the torch to the next generation is what we got to be all about.
I love it. All right, stand by for 1 second.